Marriage is supposed to be this sacred thing, right? A foundation built on trust, on love, on shared dreams. And for Damon Jordan, it really seemed to be exactly that. He poured everything he had, his energy, his time, his money, into building what he thought was a perfect life with his husband, Calvin Harris. But that perfection, it was just a facade. And when it finally shattered, the outcome wasn't just heartbreak. It was an absolute massacre.
And that's really the core question of this whole story, isn't it? What happens when the life you've built, the life you sacrificed everything for, turns out to be a complete and total lie? How far is too far?
From the outside looking in, Damon Jordan and Calvin Harris had it all. Seriously, they were the definition of a power couple, living a life that most people would kill for. But what looked like a dream was actually built on something deeply, deeply unstable.
On the surface, the dynamic between them seemed, well, perfect. You had Damon, who was the rock, this successful, super methodical, stable entrepreneur. And then on the other hand, you had Calvin. He was pure charisma, just this magnetic guy who could charm anyone and light up any room. They seemed to balance each other out perfectly.
And you have to understand, for Damon, this was never just some casual thing. He was all in, emotionally, financially, completely. To him, the vows they took were sacred. They were unshakable. And it's this absolute, total commitment that makes the betrayal that's coming so unbelievably catastrophic.
But no matter how perfect things look, the cracks always start to show eventually. At first, they weren't these giant, screaming red flags. They were just these quiet little warnings, subtle signs that something was very, very wrong.
It started with stuff that Damon, being such a meticulous guy, just couldn't ignore. He started noticing these weird charges on their credit cards, like a jewelry store in Houston, designer bags, airline tickets to places they'd never talked about going. Then came the phone calls, late at night where Calvin's voice would suddenly drop to a whisper. And finally, the phone itself became like Fort Knox, always face down, always in his pocket. And Calvin had a smooth excuse for everything, but the pattern was becoming undeniable.
So Damon confided in a colleague, Renee, who gave him this piece of advice that just cut right through all the noise. Her words basically confirmed what he was already feeling in his gut. Honest people don't have to hide things.
And that gut instinct is what led him to the breaking point. The moment of truth, it didn't come from some dramatic, tearful confession. Nope, it came from the quiet glow of a phone screen on the kitchen counter.
This is it. This is the message that blew his entire world apart. The kids, the rent. See you this weekend. In just a few words, everything Damon thought he knew just collapsed. He started scrolling, and it only got worse. Pictures of 2 smiling kids in a Texas backyard. Bank transfers. Messages from a woman named Lydia, who clearly believed Calvin was her partner.
The scale of this lie was just total. This wasn't just a simple affair. Damon realized he had been used. Every single dollar he had worked for, every sacrifice he'd made for their future, was being siphoned off to fund a secret family he never even knew existed. And when Damon finally confronted him, holding the phone, Calvin's response was just chillingly casual. There was no remorse, no apology. He actually described his secret life as a balancing act, as if Damon's heartbreak was just some unfortunate inconvenience. And that cold, dismissive attitude, that was the final push. The whole thing just exploded in a matter of moments. Damon presents the evidence. Calvin dismisses his pain. And just like that, years of trust, love, and suppressed anger just erupted. Damon grabbed a kitchen knife and he lunged. By the time their neighbor, Loretta Gaines, was frantically calling 911 about the screaming, it was already too late. But the violence didn't end in that kitchen, not even close. As the sound of sirens got closer, Damon's mind fixated on one thing: Texas. His rage now had a new destination. He wasn't fleeing justice, you see. He was chasing the source of his pain. With Calvin's bloody phone in his hand, the phone with all the addresses, all the photos of this other life, Damon just drove for hours, and every single mile just fueled this obsession to confront the people he felt had destroyed his life. By dawn, he pulls up to this quiet suburban home in Texas. He forces his way inside, screaming at Lydia that she'd stolen his life, and in a complete frenzy, he stabbed her to death. Then, he turned on the 2 young children. Just moments later, the police stormed the house, arresting him, as paramedics rushed in to save the kids. And as they pinned him to the ground, this is what he cried out. It's just a haunting summary of his shattered state of mind.
In that moment, he didn't see himself as a monster. He saw himself as a victim of a lie so huge it destroyed everyone and everything it touched.
So this cross-state massacre led to one of the most intense trials of the year. It became this huge legal battle that really grappled with questions of morality, justice, and the absolute limits of what a person can endure.
So in court, you basically had two completely different stories being told. The prosecution painted Damon as this savage, calculated killer. They argued that, yeah, he was betrayed, but that is never an excuse for slaughter. But the defense? They portrayed him as a man who was psychologically broken, a victim of years of relentless emotional abuse who just snapped. He was, in their telling, both a victim and a perpetrator.
Well, after 2 very long days of deliberation, the jury came back, and their verdict was absolutely unequivocal. Guilty of first-degree murder for Calvin, guilty of second-degree for Lydia, guilty on 2 counts of attempted murder for the children. The sentence was the absolute maximum: life in prison with no chance of ever walking free again.
When you look at the final outcome, it's just a legacy of absolute ruin. 2 adults dead, 1 man who will die in prison, and 2 little kids, wounded and orphaned, left to carry the scars of a battle they had nothing to do with. Justice was technically served, but the cost is something no verdict could ever repair.
And that leaves us with that final, haunting question. The legal system gave its answer, but the moral question, that's a lot trickier. How much blame belongs to the person whose lies lit the fuse, and how much belongs to the one who finally breaks under the weight of it all? It's a question that just hangs in the air long after the courtroom goes silent.